Minnesota Vikings fans, welcome back to the Purple People Eaters edition of The Rewind. He's Aaron, I'm Chris. And just like last week, how we did an ode to Chris Carter, that was fun to go down memory lane and whatnot, talking about CC. This week, it's Dennis Green. That's right, Denny Green, good old Denny Green, offensive guy to the core. We're going to kind of discuss his career, talk about some of the impact he had as a mentor, as a father figure, not just to players, but coaches too. If you look at, as a college coach and an NFL coach, how he was definitely, went down that path that led a lot of black coaches to get into the league. He had a lot to do with that. The mentorship program is strong and steady today. If we could only get, more black coaches in college and pros, by the way, it has improved, but it still has a ways to go. How about some more retreads? Is that a possibility? I know that was reserved for the white coaches before the retreads, but let's get a couple more of those, can we? But anyway, we're going to talk about it. The crazy stat, we were talking about this right before we came on here. He coached the Vikings to 8 playoff appearances in 9 years, despite having 7 different starting quarterbacks in postseason. I mean, that's, the Denny Green era, his tenure had a lot of quarterbacks. We know that. But when you really put it in perspective, it's it's amazing. In a lot of ways, you're just like, holy crap, dude. Like, I knew it was a lot, but my gosh. And like I said, the mentorship, the offensive eye for talent, just a variety of stuff. So we're going to break it down all through, Denny Green's tenure here for the Minnesota Vikings. We won't be playing any drum sampling. Okay, that's a little inside joke for Minnesota fans. But the guy's second in wins. Where does he rank? That's a good question, too. Where does he rank all-time coaches? Obviously, we know who's number 1. That's Les Steckel. Bud Grant. That's Bud Grant, not Les Steckel. Bud had to clean up the mess for a year after that 3-13 Les Steckel, if I remember correctly. We're going to talk it through and talk about, you look at Dungy and Billick, and they go on to win Super Bowls, and it just, like I said, the on and off the field, the guy definitely, left a mark, to say the least. R.I.P., by the way, to Dennis Green. If this is your first time listening to the Purple People Leaders podcast, welcome. It streams live in a variety of different places you can find this puppy. It streams live on blogtalkradio.com/Rope-A-Dope Radio. You don't have to go to Blog Talk and Rope-A-Dope and download the show there, or if you listen to the browser, that's cool. But if you don't want to, got a lot of different other places. You can find the show under the Rope-A-Dope Radio podcast on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Player FM, TuneIn, others. We're also part of the Grueling True Sports Podcast Network that can be found in a whole lot of places. While you're at it, why don't you head on over to thegruelingtruth.com. It's football, basketball, boxing, baseball, everything in between. And a chunk of months ago, we've been talking to this about the Spricker page, Living in Loserville. Aaron opened it up. It's heavy sports stuff. There's also some other podcasts there, too, that you might, want to listen to as well. That's Living in Loserville on Spricker. It's a Spricker page, Living in Loserville, so check that out. Real quick, before we get into this Denny Green stuff here, if you're thinking about cutting the cord, or you're not quite happy, I got something for you. It's called AT&T TV. Plans start as low as $69.99. Simple pricing, no hidden fees, no annual contract. You can stream it anywhere on any device. The cloud DVR is available, and if you sign up for the choice package or higher, it'll give you a free year of HBO Max. That's AT&T TV. All right, like I said, second winning percentage, second in wins franchise we're talking about here for the Vikings with Dennis Green. 97 and 63 overall. His coaching, tree is something that we'll talk about as well, of course. But yeah, Denny was a guy who, learned a whole lot as an assistant, both with the 49ers and at Stanford under Bill Walsh. He was an assistant for like altogether, I think about 6 to 7 years, 4 with the Niners. He was a wide receiver coach with the Niners. And, you could see that, why he kept them around, right? Not only that, but he went to go be a head coach at Stanford, but then they brought him back. And that's always something that tells you something about a guy. But I do remember, third coach overall, right, as a black coach. But second in the modern day, I do remember Art Shell in high school getting hired. And I remember hearing about this guy, Dennis Green. I remember seeing him at Stanford. And, so you could, on the low, when I look back at it, too, digging into the research, I'm going to play a clip here in a short little bit. When you start to think he was one of those guys that was starting to get the interviews and starting to look like he could be hired. And it took him a little while, that's for sure, but it was well worth the hire for the Vikings. I'm going to go ahead and bring in my co-host, Aaron. Denny Green really resonates with us just based off the age group that we were in at that time and place.
He does. We kind of figured out that it was our junior year in high school. We had a lot of things going on, so football wasn't our only focus, but we definitely were focused on the Vikings. And we just kind of come off the Jerry Burns era there where it got, we kind of lived through the Herschel Walker mess and all that stuff. And Brad Johnson had been drafted. We had ongoing jokes about Brad Johnson. And then all of a sudden, Denny Green. Now, you knew a little bit more about him than I did at the time. I knew he's at Stanford, but I didn't really know a heck of a lot about him. And we were just kind of like dealing with Vikings weren't good. They were kind of stagnant at the time, and so they needed a shot in the arm. And Denny came in and had a pretty good season coming up first. But what I remember most was, just kind of like the whole hubbub about the black head coach. And it wasn't a huge deal, but I don't think anybody really thought he would do as well as he ended up eventually doing. At least that was the general opinion on the street. But they thought maybe this was something that needed to happen for the, a little diversity in the NFL coaching ranks.
Yeah, definitely. And that is something that, before you even get off to, his eye for talent on the offensive side, when he was at the Niners, I believe they started, Bill Walsh was big on this. I believe they kind of started that mentorship that led, Denny Green played a major role, like I mentioned, early on of getting young African-American coaches in the door somehow, whether he's hiring them or, passing along to the next guy and say, hey, this guy can coach, all sorts of stuff. And this program has produced so many graduates, Lewis, Lovie Smith, Tomlin, and right now have graduated the program. And right now, literally as of last year, the group had 134 coaches in there. So there's obviously a lot of black coaches looking to get that door knocked down, right? So that's something that, I knew at the time because of who he had hired or who, succeeded him, like at Stanford. Tyrone Willingham, who had a great run at Stanford, went to Notre Dame. They actually went to the Rose Bowl at Stanford, had a great run there. Had a nice 11-2 season at Notre Dame. So, stuff, but when you're younger, you're not necessarily as tuned in. I think it was, took them, Willingham did, to the Rose Bowl, and they hadn't been there in 29 years. And that led to Shaw, too, who's currently now there. But when you think of 100, even over 100 coaches is crazy, but 134 coaches in that program really tells you, where we need to go in football, because this is getting ridiculous, even though we've, broken down some barriers minorly.
Yeah, you look where we are now, and with all the coaches that you see in college and coordinators and special teams coaches and all that stuff, and when you rewind back to that day, because you're so worried about how well your squad's going to do and who they sign on the offensive line and got a new receiver and who's out in free agency, you worry about all these other things. But if you rewind back to before Denny and Art Shell, you didn't really notice it because that was just the NFL. But now you look back and you go, wow, there was really not a lot of black head coaches, black quarterbacks. These were things that really were a problem we see in hindsight. And I think there was a lot of, consternation about, what this was going to mean for the league and all this other kind of stuff, when this was starting to pop off. And now, like you said, there's like 146 coaches in this, contingent of black coaches. And you start to see more of them. I'm not sure, it's where we want it to be, but it sure is a lot better than it was back then. I mean, when you look back, like every coach was white. Everything you saw was white. Every quarterback was white with the exception of like Warren Moon, Randall Cunningham. I remember
And
Randall
he still
Cunningham was
had to go
probably
to the
the
CFL
first.
first, Moon.
Yeah.
So
And,
he got in the Hall of Fame having to go to the CFL first. Think about that.
I remember there was a stat about Warren Moon even before he came to Minnesota that he had thrown like some odd number of miles
Yes,
for the Oilers. I can't remember what that was,
but I do remember. I don't remember the stat, but I do remember them putting in that reference.
Yeah, and so and he had a hard time, and we had Tony Dungy here was a quarterback at the University of Minnesota who, was a real groundbreaker in that regard as well. So that kind of gets pushed away since he's like a defensive coach, but I think a lot of old Gopher fans remember that. I was a little too young at the time for that, but yeah. So I guess my point is that if you look at where we are now, and then kind of go back the last, 20 some odd years. I mean, it's been a lot of progress. I don't know if it's enough, but there has been some, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, and he started as a graduate assistant in 1972 at Iowa. Went to Dayton just for a year, running back coach, wide receiver, did running back coach at Iowa 74 to 76. Stanford running back coach 77-78, Niners 79 special team coach, got his foot in the door into the pros, then got hired as the coordinator at Stanford, then got hired as the head coach at Northwestern, which it was only the second coach at the time. And just reading that over again, Wichita State was the first, and they don't even have a football program anymore, for Christ's sakes. So he's there 81-85. They were like 0-31 before he got there. So he didn't turn the program around. It needed a lot of turning, but he definitely improved it to an extent anyway. That's for sure. And then he stayed with the Niners from 86 to 89 as a wide receiver coach. So you could tell the guy had. I mean, Walsh was calling the plays obviously then, but like if you really look at running back coach, especially like no wonder he was a good head coach, man. Obviously 1992 to 2001 he was a head coach of the Vikings, had his tenure at Arizona as well, some other minor league stuff. Yeah, man, 97 and 62, obviously peaking at that 15-1 season. What really stands out to me is the eye for talent, especially on the offensive side, and clearly eye for coaching talent with Dungy and Billick on both sides of the ball too.
We probably knew a lot of guys that were languishing around, in the, I won't say the depths of the NFL, coaching system, but he did have an eye for offensive talent. He was a big system guy, Chris. I mean, everything to him was his system, which was a variation of the West Coast offense, pretty much straight down the line West Coast offense, but which he picked up in San Francisco with all that time that he had there. And you start to look at the years he was there, and I was with Joe Montana and Jerry Rice and Roger Craig and Ronnie Lott and all those type of dudes were hanging out in San Francisco at the time. So I'm sure a lot rubbed off on him just to see talent and the type of dudes that you need to win football games. And I just don't think, when he came here, there's a lot of, criticism, but you look back at it now and it's like, wow, man, this guy, not only did he have a large weight on his shoulders coming in, but he did very well here as far as any coach that could do there. I mean, I just seen this paragraph on Wikipedia, and it's just shocking to me. As Northwestern, he got there in 81, and the school had gone 131-1 in its last 33 games. I mean, that's
I thought it was 0 for 31. Okay, 1 for 31. Jesus. Yeah. So I mean, that's a bad program. That's 3 years of just
So
out.
you're picking up these jobs that are nobody really wants these jobs. It appears that he ended up falling into and doing quite well. And so you got to have an eye for talent. You got to have an eye for coaches. You got to know what you're looking for, and you get that through experience. And he had tons of experience with the Niners, and it's one of those things where you have to go, wow, this is not only there's the adversity in just him being him, but the adversity of the jobs that he was taking and allowed to take. It's quite an incredible story.
Yeah. I mean, to know what you can do and to have that. Obviously, this is in all walks of life as far as industry and categories for black people, of course, and to know. Dude, I can do this, but I'm a running back coach. I'm a this the grind that he had to do. Art Shell, Fritz Pollard, and then him. And obviously, like you said, he did. I mean, Royce, Barrera, Sansevier, they had their runs at him, no doubt about it. And I remember him saying, let me just coach the damn team. And of course, his famous drum solos. But the eye for talent, especially on the offensive end. Even minor guys like Kleinsasser and Andrew Glover or Jake Reed or Matt Burke, who was like a 5th or 6th rounder who, turned out to be a stud. To have that many quarterbacks, Aaron, and to still be able to put up some numbers, that just blows me away. Obviously, it hurts in a lot of ways because, damn, we talk about that until these 3 years with Cousins. We hadn't had a run in a long time. I mean, Ponder made it a couple of years. Jackson made it a couple of years. Wilson made it a little bit. Kramer, obviously, then. But since the 90s, man, it just blows me away. We were talking about this off air. Like, the thing about coordinators is, and just offensive guys in general, or defense, but definitely more offense, it's to be able to fit you having a system is big, right? But you got to fit the talent that you got, and to be able to keep having either 500 seasons or above and keep making the playoffs and have 4 Central Division championships and all that, like, to have that many freaking quarterbacks, Johnson and Moon and Cunningham, and I mean Jeff George, like, it's really striking. But yeah, that eye for talent on the offensive end, I mean, it just seems like he always had a replacement.
Well, if you think back, Chris, I mean, those were the years where we couldn't get anybody to rush the passer. We kept drafting dudes and it wouldn't work out. And then we'd have, we were in the Tampa 2 for a long time. And then offenses started figuring that out. So we started, getting killed in the secondary a lot. But the offenses were always steady, no matter who was in there, whether it was, we've been down the list. You went down a little bit of yourself of just the carousel of quarterbacks that we had gone through at the time. The offense was always good. Robert Smith was another good pick. Corey Stringer was another good pick he had. And guys that you just didn't think, sometimes you were like, who's this guy? You don't even know. But then they'd come in, the Ismail kid who kind of did kick returns and was a little receiver for a while. Obviously, Randy, we'll get into that a little bit later. I mean, he had an eye for talent for sure. Maybe his downfall, Chris, and maybe you can push back on it a little bit, but maybe his downfall was that he was a little too rigid to his system and he wouldn't really move it. I mean, this is what got him where he was. This is what worked. I can understand his mindset, but maybe, he did need to tailor that system a little bit more to the players he had.
I mean, yeah, no, it went from more of a run-heavy fullback to 2 tight ends to then 3 wide receiver set, all in his time frame. So, yes and no. I mean, we talk about the O-line a lot the last few years, right? For good measure, obviously, for good reason. But the offensive line and the linemen during it now, obviously, like Randall McDaniel was already on the team. He was still here. But Corey Stringer, Jeff Christie, David Dixon, Todd Stussy, Everett Lindsay, Gary Zimmerman, Kirk Lodermilk, Tim Irwin, Matt Burke, like, just give us half of that and we're good to go.
Yeah, I mean, you've said it. Those names are great names. McDaniel's a Hall of Famer. Loudermilk, those guys. That's an offensive line. Even Burke came in. I mean, these are guys that Burke was like a third round pick or something out of
I think he
Harvard,
was like fifth, dude. Fifth or
something like
sixth.
that. And he
It was
turned
low.
into an all pro center. We had great offensive lines, and we don't want to reminisce on offensive lines because the situation we're in now. But man, those were the guys back then. I mean, some of them are Ring of Honor guys. And that was a steady. Before that, we had the guys that were back in the late '80s that were pretty darn good offensive line too. That Jeff Christie, that's not late '80s, but that's another name in there. Dave Dixon did, light went off in my head for that one as well. Yeah, man. I mean, the offense was always going no matter who was there. Running backs, we had Robert Smith, we had Leroy Horde, we had, God, I'm trying to think of more running backs. We had a line of running backs for a while there that was just kind of almost as replaceable as the quarterback. But the system did prevail, and offensively, it was never the problem on those squads. It was always defensive problems and kickers, of course.
That's another one. Offensive line and kickers. I guess we're putting the salt in the wound for Vikings fans out there.
But come to think of it, a name just popped in my head when I said that. Fuad Revez. I don't remember anything that he ever did that was that egregious. Now I don't have a encyclopedic memory of all of Fuad's kicks, but I don't remember him missing any substantial kicks.
Yeah, I just remember really one kick, that was missed in his time frame. And I think we all know what that was against Atlanta.
Yeah, too soon.
Yeah, right. I don't think it'll ever be a time we really want to discuss that. But speaking of offense, Brian Billick came in there and thrived clearly. Definitely the top two, Dungy and Billick. On the offensive side, though, he went. And it shows you what kind of coach he is, like we've been talking about Denny. And then look at Billick. I mean, he came there and they didn't have some kind of great offense, but they rode their defense. And slowly but surely they got a little better, at offense. But that was a defensive heavy, okay, I can do this. We're going to focus on a couple things. We got Jamal Lewis. We're going to, so it was a smart, not, kind of outside the system type look for then Billick. And then obviously Dungy from 92 to 95. I mean, whether it's in late August before the season starts or next year right around this time, we're going to do a Dungy defense from 92 to 95. And then obviously we'll talk, of course, about his Tampa defenses and the Colts defense that peaked at the right time with Bobby Sanders coming back at safety and whatnot when they won the championship for Dungy. But, I mean, Billick was one thing, right? No doubt about it. But Tony Dungy, 92 to 95, I mean, we'd always lead, in turnovers, interceptions. I mean, it was just I just loved the Dungy defense. And, that was Danny Green bringing a quality coach on the staff.
Yeah, it really was. And you're right. Now that you kind of jogged my memory, some of those defenses were pretty solid. I remember it was kind of a bend but don't break. I think that's where we got the nomenclature for that was, we turned the ball over a lot more. Couldn't necessarily stop the run that well, but, in the back end, things held up pretty well. But, so I guess the defenses weren't terrible. I think the offenses were always a little bit better. But yeah, Dungy was a great coach. He brought in Billick as well. I mean, he won a Super Bowl with Dilfer. So, I mean, that's what can you say about that? A great defense. Definitely rode him through there. But, that's one thing about Billick. He was always kind of by Denny's side until obviously he left. But that was a good combination of head coach and offensive coordinator there. And then you throw Dungy in there and you've got three really good coaches that he brought in. And then there was guys like, Foch Fazio and some other dudes that were lower in the ranks that ended up actually being pretty good coaches out of that tree. So, I mean, he definitely made his imprint as far as the coaching tree goes. And definitely as far as coaching went, especially for Vikings. I mean, to make the playoffs, almost every season, that I don't think that's been done since. I mean, Zimmer's doing it every other year here.
Yeah, and even, I mean, it took a while just to get back up under Childress to get to the playoffs. So, yeah, it's he definitely knew he had that eye for talent, no doubt about it. We could talk about his overall record, which we talk a little bit about, second in wins, second, overall winning percentage as well. Before we get into where does he rank in Vikings history, let's talk about. I know you were talking about Randy Moss because that was a big, big thing to where that was that mentorship thing too, where he really had to okay, I got Chris Carter here. Okay, we can do this. And I don't know. There's just a couple of like you said, guys that Moss was different, but guys that would just kind of pop up and you're like, wow, he's freaking really like this guy. Where'd they get this guy? But let's talk about the playoff record and performance as well. You want to talk about Moss and then the playoff record and his performance in that, because that's obviously part of judging a tenure as well.
Sure. The name that popped in my head about when you were saying guys that just came out of nowhere, a guy like Chuck Evans. Remember Chuck Evans, the fullback?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with a neck roll. He was still neck rolling at that time, but yeah. So we talked last week in our throwback show on Chris Carter about how he got to the Vikings, and there's a guy on the squad, at least there was under Denny, who was in charge of making sure players went the straight and narrow. So everybody was kind of scared off by Randy, and that's why he fell to 21 in the draft. And Dallas was supposed to take him, but for whatever reason they didn't. And he fell to us, and Denny was fairly confident that this guy on the staff, and God, the name just escapes me now, but I think it'll come back to me. And Chris Carter would have enough of a guiding influence on a rookie, and he knew obviously that the talent was there. I think most of the league had to have known, although 21 or 20 teams did pass on him still. And you see his highlights out of Marshall, and you're like, how could you not draft this kid? But he had some problems at Florida State, and he had some problems. So he went to Marshall. So there's a lot of reasons, but anyways, he fell in the draft. Denny was smart enough to pick him up. And at the time, we're like, oh, okay, we're not hearing anything about this kid in camp. And what's going on? And obviously, they're just keeping their mouth shut about him. And so that's another smart, thing that Denny did, was not hype him up in training camp and just let him take the league by storm. But he seemed to, be very good at managing players. Now, I'm not close enough to the situation to know if that is the case. He probably had some problems with some players, but generally when you hear like Robert Smith talk about him, when you hear Chris Carter talk about him, when you hear Randy talk about him, obviously Randy had his own rules, but he's Randy
and his
Moss,
own ratio too.
Yeah. So you don't hear a bad word. Now, maybe that's because he's passed on, unfortunately, but even before that, you never really heard from the players a bad word. I guess Robert liked to drink a little bit, and Denny would get on him about that, but that's what coaches do, so that's not a thing. But I've never heard anybody say a really bad word. In fact, a lot of these guys are in the Hall of Fame now, and they definitely thank him. So, he definitely had an impact here. And when you go back to Royce and Barrero and these guys that, at the time were critical of him for either fairly or unfairly or both, I think if you asked them and sat them down, I think they would probably have a slightly changed opinion and maybe a little regret about how they handled the situation. In hindsight, they seem to be reasonable people. I just think the times and what Denny was trying to accomplish and had accomplished. You're gonna 41 donut is not the greatest thing that happened under Denny's watch, but there's a lot of other great things that happened. And we never got a Super Bowl, but we're still waiting. Nobody's got us a Super Bowl, so that's not even a matter of contention. But he seemed like he was good with players. He seemed like he had a good system involved. He definitely, was able to keep players somewhat in line. But then you think about, Love Boat and all that stuff. But, what can you do about it? I don't know. I feel like overall, take on Dennis Green is far more positive than negative. At least from where I sit.
Yeah, and some of those guys. First of all, Love Boat wasn't under Denny, so let's not give him that. Okay, let's not blame that one.
Let's retract that. It was at 2005. Yeah, that wasn't Denny. I stand corrected.
He didn't bring Fred Smoot on to this squad. Okay, even though I liked Fred Smoot a lot, but when we brought him in, I didn't mind him. But We were not going to put that on Teddy. But you're right, though. I mean, it's not, even a guy like John Rendell, Henry Thomas, like there are some guys where you're like, wow, even knowing, hey, well, actually, I almost gave him something. And Chris Carter, we talked about that last week, how he actually came a year or two before that. But you're right. I mean, he definitely is known for his mentorship, and sometimes a father figure, like a second father figure type guy too, where he's like, hey, you know, almost like if he comes into your, like at Stanford, right? If he comes into your living room, you're gonna feel good about him, your kid, your young boy going to Stanford. Well, obviously Stanford's gonna be awesome, but just in general, you feel like, okay, this is safe. He's gonna get on him, but he does have a little player coach in him. He's not just the hardest dude at all times. He's definitely gonna get on you though, and but he'll make you laugh. You know what I mean? He definitely seemed like an upbeat guy overall, and I forgot to mention this too. Like you mentioned, some of the local broadcast and print guys, at that time they were trying to make a name for themselves too, right? So I think some of that plays into it too. Like if you look at Dan, the guy who's just, I mean, sure he blogs some, but he's a broadcaster now, right? And I like him a lot better that way than some of the angles he had to take as a writer. It's like, oh, really, dude? I think this is your shtick on this one. I love you, but I'm not feeling this one. But that was part of it. We talked about when we did the KG one last year, how some of the things he said is like, yeah, but dude, who's with them? You need teams. You need a full team to go further in the playoffs. So I thought some of the stuff he would say was unfair, but I think you stated it right, that when they look back at it years later, decades later, that amount of wins in that amount of time, the consistency for division championships, it's pretty damn solid. He was very, very consistent, no doubt about that. Playoff record wise, let's dig into that a little bit, and let's start to get kind of a ranking where we think he falls in the Vikings history.
Well, I'll say this under my breath. He should have won a Super Bowl in '98, but it wasn't to be. He had his playoff. Going to the playoffs.
Well, if Robert Smith wouldn't have ran out of bounds, he's his doctor. He's going to be a doctor, but he doesn't know how to stay in bounds.
Stop. We can't go down that road. We could spend another show talking about all of the little incidents that happened. Gary Anderson, what can we say? Moving on. I remember 41 Donut, but that was after that cursed year. A lot of the playoff wins before, they were close games. I don't remember getting blown out, although that might have been a thing. But, this may be where this apathy of like just make the playoffs kind of maybe started, because we just made the playoffs a lot, and some we lost, some we won, obviously. Where does he rank, Chris? I have to go with my memory, okay? I don't have a felt memory of Bud Grant's years. I know the lore, I know the legend, but I don't know.
Number one anyway, so we don't even have to talk about him.
I concede that Bud Grant is the number one Vikings coach, but I don't have an understanding of how the nuances of Bud's whole regime. I do know a little bit of Jerry Burns, a little bit of Denny, or all of Denny, all of Chili, all of Frazier, all of Zimmer.
What about Tyson? Come on.
Forgot about Tyson.
Tough guy Tyson.
So I got to say, I don't want to rank them, but I'll say it depends on the criteria, Chris. But let's just say wins and losses here. Is that what we're going with? And just kind of overall
it doesn't
success?
It's up to you. There's no exact criteria.
I think Tice was one of my favorite ones, but that was a soundbite. So I just like the guy. He kind of reminds me of the new coach in Detroit. But let's go. I mean, it has to be Denny. Has to be second. He had 9 years, 8 playoffs, winning seasons mostly, division championships, consistent winning product. you got to go Denny after Bud. Zimmer's got a chance to come in there if he can get some good wins. But, and Chile, I guess, was a pretty good coach. He got us to, the championship game. So did Denny, and so did Zimmer. So I got to go with Denny just because of consistency over a 9-year period of time.
And so did Burns too. Got us to that doorstep and didn't get over the hump either. So
Correct.
Yeah, I'm right with you. It's pretty easy for me. I think Zimmer's got a chance, but I think it's pretty easy based off the wins and the consistency. And as time went by, like we were saying, when Dungy here, the defense was legit, but that offense needed a kick in the butt, and you could see every year, slowly but surely, to the point where we had Jake Reed, Chris Carter, and then Randy. Like, it got better over time, and that's when you know he's a great coach in there and hiring the right people. And like I said, when you look back at some of those lines, it's pretty ridiculous on offense, but also defense and what we got Randall for and all that. The one thing that stands out to me, it took a while to get a win. I think he got up to like 0-4 or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but that Giants game where there's like a 30-yard, 40-yard gorgeous throw by Cunningham to Jake Reed. Still down, though, with like 80 seconds left or whatever. Chris Walsh is able to recover the ball. Still had a chance. We end up going down there, kicked the game-winning field goal. Yes, I said it. Eddie Murray came on and kicked the game-winning, let me look at it actually, 24-yard field goal with 10 seconds left. The Vikings had the biggest road playoff comeback in 25 years, winning 23-22. I remember that in the playoffs. That's like one of my, probably the second biggest memory, third biggest memory. Obviously, both those conference championships stick in your brain as well. But yeah, overall, I think it's pretty easy because Burnsy was damn good, not as consistent. Like you said, Childress definitely not as consistent. I think it. I mean, Tice would give up the game plan in the press conference. He even admitted the next week, or the next year. He's like, God, it's like, dude, we're not that good of a team to where you can just walk into town and just do the tough guy routine, and we're just gonna stomp these dudes. Randy ratio. We get it, Tice. We want to get the ball to Randy, but you don't have to do it 9 times in a half. Otherwise,
and do you
it doesn't
think we
work.
could keep that to ourselves?
You're right. You don't need to say it in camp. He's saying that shit in camp. I remember Sports Illustrated, Randy ratio, like, oh, Jesus. Or Star Trek, actually. Randy, this motherfucker with the Randy rate. Like, come on, dude. What about a decoy? He's a pretty damn good decoy with 2 or 3 guys on him. They were moving linebackers up to the damn line. Like, that got to me. But back to Denny, yes. I think he's clear and far away. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Burnsy had plenty to do with the West Coast offense back in the day, too. Walsh gets all the credit for good reason, but Burnsy was heady. I think he's third. Right now, I'd say I think Zimmer's better than Childress, but we'll see. I think he is, though. I think he's, we haven't been consistent, but we weren't consistent under Childress necessarily either. So, the book's out. But, yeah, definitely second. I definitely am confident that Denny is the second best. He drafted Kleinsasser, dude. So, I mean, that makes him second just right there. Any other items that you want to discuss about rest in peace, Dennis Green?
Well, you're bringing up all these names. It's just like throwing me back. Chris Walsh was a name you brought up. Like, oh, yeah, that guy.
Special teams guy. Talk about concussions. Like, concussion. Don't worry about that, dude. I'm fine.
Yeah, that guy was a special teams. And he could catch, man. He made some really great catches throughout the years as well. Then you had the Quadri Ismail, who was also a pretty good receiver. Matthew Hatchett was towards the end of that, I think. He might have actually been a Chile guy. I'm getting it kind of fuzzy. All these guys. Randall was then. Jerry Ball was in there with Randall. I'm trying to think. Dolman came back for a little while. I think we got Jared Allen under Denny for the last bit.
No.
Wasn't? See, that those years right there, the end of Denny and the beginning of Childress are kind of fuzzy for me.
Well, you got Tice. Before you go, don't
Yeah.
just go by Tice
Oh,
now.
I did
Come
have
on.
something to say about Tice. Tice traded Randy after he devoted 40% of his offense to him, and then drafted Troy Williamson, who couldn't catch anything, but he was fast. And then you went through those quarterbacks, Chris, in those years of God, I can't remember their names, Brooks Bollinger, and there's another guy too that just should have been a career backup, but end up anyways. Yeah, so I get a little mixed up, but I liked your ranking of the coaches. I thought that was probably pretty fair, and I did have a little, thought to myself about the Zimmer versus Childress. I'm gonna go Zimmer over Childress. I think more years and equal NFC Championship games. But here's the real problem with that: is there's no Super Bowls to date. I think other franchises can go. This guy won one Super Bowl. This guy won two. We're judging on NFC Championship games. We're judging on, Bud's the only one that's ever gotten to Super Bowls, and he got to four of them. End of the story here is we got to win a Super Bowl here to really cement any of these rankings. I mean, we can throw stuff at the wall, but man, I mean, since '68 and what is it, '65 we started, and there's no Super Bowls and 4 Super Bowl losses. It's time. It's time for a Super Bowl win. It's time for a Super Bowl win.
Yeah, I mean, hey, since we've been alive, I just want to get the goddamn. I just want those 2 weeks. That's all I want. I'm not going to get greedy. I want those 2 weeks from the conference final to the Super Bowl to just walk on air and float in the clouds and just know what 2 weeks of we're going to the goddamn Super Bowl feels like, because it hasn't happened on our watch. And we're just hoping that it will. Any last words pertaining to our guy Denny, or any other items that you want to talk
about? I think we're all a little better with Denny in hindsight here, and so I want to thank him for his years, and may he rest in peace and all the stuff for his family, and make sure everything's cool. But so thanks Denny for a lot of playoff appearances and some good years here with the Vikings. And follow us on Instagram at Living in Loserville. Follow us on Spricker, account by the same name. I'll be starting a podcast called It's Just Sports here in the next week with local and national subjects. And check out all of Chris's content on Rope-A-Dope Radio.
All right. Well, this is going to do it for a nice stretch here since September. So we do plan to do one, maybe two of these rewind shows late August to kind of get the blood rushing and stuff before the season kicks off. There'll be a lot to talk about it, no doubt. But have yourself a great summer, and we'll see you when this summer's done. I don't even want to talk about the end of the summer right now. It's May 31st, okay? But we will see you sometime August, early September. Peace out.